All right, today we're jumping into one of the most complicated and important periods in all of American history, Reconstruction. We're talking about the years from 1865 to 1877, right after the Civil War, when the country had to figure out how to put itself back together, how to rebuild, and, how to completely redefine what it even meant to be an American.
I mean, seriously, think about that for a second. How do you possibly mend a country that has literally just ripped itself in two? That one giant, soul-searching question is what's lurking behind every single political fight, every new law, and every act of violence for the next 12 years.
Okay, so let's get into it. Right from the start, this wasn't just about rebuilding burned-out cities or farms. The real challenge was about rebuilding the entire soul of the nation. And right out of the gate, two completely opposite ideas about how to do that slammed into each other.
So in one corner, you had President Lincoln. He was pushing for a path of mercy and forgiveness, believing that was the fastest and maybe the only way to really heal the country. But in the other corner, you had the radical Republicans in Congress, and they looked at the more than 600,000 dead and basically said, no way. The South has to be punished and completely remade from the ground up to protect the rights of millions of newly freed Black Americans.
Well, of course, Lincoln's vision is not what happened. After he was assassinated, his successor, Andrew Johnson, also went for a lenient plan, but kind of without Lincoln's deep commitment to justice. And what happened? The old Southern leadership just swept right back into power. And the immediate result was absolutely chilling: the Black Codes. These were laws designed to control every aspect of Black life: work, travel, property, basically trying to recreate slavery in all but name.
When Congress saw these Black Codes popping up all over the South, it was a massive red flag. They knew Johnson's plan was a total disaster. So this set the stage for an epic constitutional showdown. It was a full-blown power struggle between the president and a Congress that was now absolutely determined to take the reins of Reconstruction.
And Congress did not mess around. They flexed their muscles in a huge way, passing things like the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and extending the Freedmen's Bureau, an agency that helped newly freed people. Now, President Johnson, he vetoed these bills. But then, and this was a stunning move, Congress just voted to override his veto. The message was crystal clear. Congress, not the president, was running the show now.
And this is where the whole thing just boiled over. To try and trap Johnson, Congress passed a pretty wild law called the Tenure of Office Act. It basically said the president couldn't fire his own cabinet members without Congress's approval. Well, Johnson saw this as a direct assault on his power, and he basically said, "Watch me." He fired his Secretary of War anyway, and that was the final straw. The House moved to impeach him almost immediately.
The trial was just unbelievable. In the final vote, it came down to one single vote. Johnson was acquitted and kept his job by the thinnest of margins. But, and this is so important, even though he wasn't removed from office, the whole ordeal completely shattered his political power. He was basically a lame duck, totally unable to stop Congress from doing what it wanted to do.
So with the president effectively neutralized, Congress got to work making its vision for the country permanent. And they didn't just pass new laws. No, they went for the whole shebang. They started one of the most radical legal transformations in American history. They set out to rewrite the Constitution itself.
First up was the 13th Amendment. This one was huge and pretty straightforward. It formally and forever ended the institution of slavery everywhere in the United States, period. It closed that horrific chapter of American history for good.
Okay, then came the 14th Amendment, and this one is a whole different beast. It's way more complex, with a lot of layers. Crucially, it established birthright citizenship. It said anyone born in the U.S. is a citizen, and it guaranteed every citizen equal protection of the laws. This was a game changer because it meant for the first time the federal government could force states to respect the rights of their citizens.
And finally, you have the 15th Amendment, which tackled voting rights head-on. It declared that the right to vote couldn't be denied because of a person's race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Together, these three amendments became the new foundation for civil rights in America.
But there was a truly heartbreaking consequence to all this. By specifically protecting the vote for men, these amendments drove a painful wedge right through the women's suffrage movement. It literally tore allies apart. On one side, you had leaders like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who felt utterly betrayed and opposed the 15th Amendment because it left women out. On the other, you had leaders like Lucy Stone, who argued that it was a critical first step and that women's turn would have to come next. This split would weaken and divide the fight for women's right to vote for decades.
So you have these powerful new amendments. You've got federal authority backing them up.
For a moment, it really seemed like this grand experiment might actually work. But despite all these incredible victories on paper, the entire project of Reconstruction would eventually be abandoned. Its successes, as real as they were, ended up being tragically short-lived.
But before we get to the collapse, we have to talk about the wins, because they were huge. You had unprecedented political participation. I mean, black men were voting in massive numbers and holding office at every level of government, all the way up to the U.S. Senate. And new public school systems were being created for all children for the first time. This stuff mattered. A lot. These were real, tangible gains.
So, what went so wrong? Well, the first big reason was a brutal, relentless campaign of resistance from white Southerners. Let's be very clear. Groups like the Ku Klux Klan were terrorist organizations. They used lynchings, beatings, and intimidation to attack black voters, leaders, and their allies. The goal was simple and horrifying: use pure terror to restore white supremacy.
And while all that violence was happening in the South, something else was happening up north. Their will to keep fighting just collapsed. Frankly, the North got tired. An economic crisis hit in the 1870s, people were sick of the constant conflict, and the political commitment to pay for troops and enforce these new laws just evaporated.
And the final nail in the coffin was a shady backroom political deal, the Compromise of 1877. To settle a messy, disputed presidential election, a deal was struck. The Republicans got the White House, and in return, they agreed to pull the last federal troops out of the South. And with that, the federal protection was gone. Just gone. Reconstruction was over.
The failure of Reconstruction left a deep, painful scar in America. And the big questions it raised about who gets to be a citizen, about the role of the federal government, about racial justice, well, they didn't just disappear. They've been echoing through our history ever since.
You know, if there's one massive lesson to take from this whole era, it's this. Laws on paper are not the same thing as justice on the ground. You can write the most beautiful words in the Constitution, but if you don't have the political will to enforce them and defend them, they can end up meaning nothing. Which leaves us with a really tough question, one that is just as relevant today as it was then. What does this all teach us? Can you actually legislate equality into existence? Or is any top-down effort doomed to fail without a real fundamental shift in people's hearts and minds, and just as important, a long-term political commitment to see it through? It's a question America is still grappling with.